In this story, you'll hear about a man who slowly realizes his wife is no longer the partner he thought she was. What begins as silence and distance turns into a discovery that changes everything and shows how quiet decisions can be the most powerful. "Not tonight," she said, eyes locked on her tablet like I wasn't even there. That sentence used to come wrapped in softness, a gentle excuse laced with a kiss on the forehead. But tonight, it was hollow, mechanical, like she was swiping away a notification she didn't care to open. I stared at the ceiling for a beat, then turned my head slowly to the side, watching Mara, my wife, bathed in the glow of her screen. Her legs were tucked under her, posture relaxed, eyes flicking across whatever held more interest than me. My hand still resting on her hip from a moment earlier, quietly retracted, like I was petting a statue that never came to life. I didn't speak. I never do anymore. Instead, I rolled to my side, facing the wall, heartbeat pounding louder than I wanted to admit. My mind tried to play it cool. She's tired. She's stressed. It's not about you. But my chest told the truth. The bitterness tasted metallic at the back of my throat. The room, dim and warm, suddenly felt like a tomb, and the silence between us buzzed louder than any scream. We hadn't really touched him in weeks. Each night I tried. Not aggressively, not pushy, just a soft reach, a kiss to the shoulder, a whispered, "Hey, you still awake?" But every night it was the same. Not tonight. Sometimes with a sigh, sometimes with a pat on the hand like I was a child asking for too much candy before dinner. This time, though, I didn't even bother replying. Just stared at the drywall, blinking against the sting in my eyes, swallowing it all whole like I always do. She didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't care. Her fingers kept tapping, scrolling, zooming in on whatever version of life she preferred to mine. And here's the kicker. She was smiling. That subtle, half-absent kind of smile you don't fake when you're annoyed or tired. Not a grin, but enough to twist a knife in someone who just reached for you, hoping to be wanted. Can you imagine being in that bed, reaching for the woman you married, shared dreams with, built routines with, and watching her light up moreover? A screen than your touch. I lay there in the dark, staring at nothing, and for the first time I didn't feel hurt. I felt clear. Let me back up. My name's Derek. I'm 37. Been married for 9 years to Mara, a tech consultant who treats spreadsheets better than people. I work in logistics. It's not sexy, but it pays the bills. Our house is a 3-bedroom colonial with good bones and too much silence. We've got matching toothbrush holders and coordinated towels. On paper, we are that couple. Grown up, stable, boring in all the right ways. Except none of that matters anymore. Because here's the thing. I've spent the last 6 months trying to keep something alive that's been dead for a long time. And tonight, that not tonight wasn't rejection. It was a challenge. And I'm done playing defense. Tomorrow I won't say a word, won't confront, won't beg. But I've made a decision. I'm going to take everything she's given me, all the silence, all the avoidance, all the passive power plays, and I'm going to build a plan out of it, cold, quiet, controlled. Because if she thinks she's in charge of this collapse, she hasn't met the version of me that's done pretending. So buckle in. This wasn't the explosion. This was just the first crack. The next morning, I heard her humming in the kitchen. Mara always hums when she's in a good mood. Like the past 12 hours hadn't happened. Like last night wasn't another quiet rejection sealed in silence. I listened. From the hallway for a second, back against the wall, arms folded, trying to decipher her tune. Something upbeat, familiar, happy. I didn't recognize the man she was smiling for anymore, but it sure wasn't me. I stepped into the kitchen without a word. She was pouring coffee, her favorite striped mug in one hand, hair tied up, wearing that oatmeal-colored sweater she swore was her thinking armor. She glanced up as if I'd just wandered in from a jog. Not from the shared bed she turned into no man's land. "Oh, morning," she said brightly, like I wasn't still carrying the weight of her tablet-lit silence from hours ago. "Guess who finally got the promotion?" Jasmine. She totally deserves it, honestly. I mean, she works like a beast. She paused, waiting for me to smile, to clap, to engage. I didn't. Nice, I muttered, brushing past her to grab a glass of water. My voice came out low, clipped. I didn't mean for it to sound cold, but I didn't stop it either. Let her notice. Let her feel it, if she still could. Her smile faltered just slightly. Then came the classic save. She swirled her coffee, looking thoughtful. She's been with the company forever, and she really... I've got work. I cut in, rinsing my glass and placing it down with a little more force than necessary. I didn't wait for her reply. Just turned and headed for my office, closing the door behind. Like it was a vault sealing off an old life. Inside, the walls were quiet. My laptop hummed to life. Outlook buzzed with unread messages, but none of it registered. I sat at my desk and stared, not at the screen, but through it, past it, into the places in my mind where her voice used to echo in softer, slower tones. Before everything got sterile and structured, before the love got laminated, I thought back to simpler mornings when she'd slide beside me on the couch in pajama shorts, hair a mess, her head resting on my shoulder as she scrolled through Zillow. Listings just for fun. Look at this one in Vermont, she'd whisper. We could grow old here. Back then, I believed her. Now she could be talking about moving to Vermont with anyone. I heard her laugh from the kitchen. Not at me, of course. Never at me. She was on the phone now. Probably Jasmine. Probably reliving office politics or planning coffee dates I wouldn't be invited to. That sound used to be my favorite. Her laugh. It had a brightness to it, like wind chimes on a balcony. But now it grated. Now it sounded like something preserved in a glass jar. Beautiful, unreachable. I minimized my inbox, opened a blank document, typed nothing. I wasn't angry. Not really. That was the terrifying part. I was calculating. This house felt like a set, like someone had built a fake home to trick a man into staying put. Everything in its place. Fridge magnets from our trips, a gallery wall of smiling faces. His and hers throw blankets, but the energy, plastic. That morning I made a quiet decision. Not a revenge plot. Not some outburst. Just this. I'm done reacting. She wanted a version of me that didn't need her. Fine. I'll become the man she couldn't read, the one she couldn't see coming. The gyms always had this strange quiet in the middle of the afternoon. Just the occasional thud of weights, the soft squeal of sneakers on polished floors, and the steady hum of fans overhead. I liked it. It was the only place left that didn't expect anything from me. I hadn't planned on talking to anyone that day. I just wanted to lift heavy things, feel my blood pound against something other than heartache. But as I dropped down onto the bench press, I heard that familiar voice behind me. Thought you disappeared, said Miles, clapping me on the back. He was the kind of friend who didn't need an invite. Tall, easygoing. The guy who always wore the same beat-up Ohio State hoodie like it was armor. We hadn't seen much of each other since before the pandemic, but we'd known each other since high school. Still here? I grunted, lining up the barbell. Gave a mock serious nod. Good, 'cause you've got that man on the verge face. Either that or constipation, I couldn't help it. One corner of my mouth twitched up. He always had timing. After my set, we moved to the rowers. A couple of rounds in, Miles tossed me a towel, leaned back on the bench beside me and asked, "You all right, man?" It was a question asked 1,000 times between men who rarely mean it. But this time he said it quiet, solid, like he knew I might actually answer. I stared down at the floor mats. "She won't touch me," I said, voice low. He didn't laugh. Didn't flinch, just waited. It's been months, Miles. At first I thought it was stress, work, whatever. But now I don't even feel like her husband anymore. He let out a long breath, rubbing the back of his neck. That's rough, man. I nodded slowly, everywhere. Night I reach for her. And every night it's the same rejection. Like she's doing me a favor just by sharing a bed. Damn, he said, then leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. Listen, I'm not saying this is the answer, but maybe you test her loyalty. I looked over, eyebrow raised. He shrugged. Nothing crazy. Just poke the bubble. See what pops. I let that sit in the air for a second. Test her loyalty. The idea didn't feel foreign. It felt like something I'd already been circling deep down, like I'd just been waiting for someone to give it a name. That night, I didn't say a word to Mara. I watched her fall asleep, tablet still on her chest, mouth slightly open. And when I was sure her breathing had settled into that slow, unguarded rhythm, I reached for her phone on the nightstand. My fingers were steady, cold even, like someone performing a routine medical procedure. The app I downloaded earlier blinked to life. It promised real-time sync, quiet installation, total stealth. I didn't know if it would work, didn't even know what I was hoping to find. But I set it up anyway, a clone of her digital life. I slid the phone back into place, without so much as a whisper, then turned to stare at the ceiling. The numbness wasn't sadness. It wasn't jealousy. It was precision. I wasn't her husband anymore, I was her mirror. And if she was hiding something, she was about to meet the version of me built to uncover it. The next evening, the app finally delivered. I was sitting alone in my car outside the grocery store. Engine off, screen glowing blue in my lap. Notifications had been trickling in all day, but I hadn't had the chance, or maybe the nerve, to open the thread until now. Her messages had synced. Her entire digital soul mirrored on my screen like a confession. The first few texts were nothing, a group chat with her coworkers, a dinner recipe from her sister, promo code for yoga leggings. But then I saw the name Corey, not a last name, not a profile pic, just Corey. And right away my chest went still. The first message was from him. Missed our little lunch escape today. Don't make me wait until next week. Winky face, then Mara's reply, I needed the break too. You're bad for my schedule, but good for my stress. The air in the car thickened. I scrolled, reading with a kind of detached clarity, like I was an editor reviewing someone else's screenplay. Kiss emojis, inside jokes, mentions of hotel rooms, complete with numbers. Room 237 again tonight, you always pick the coldest spots. Corey, you warm it up, babe. My fingers didn't tremble. I wasn't angry. I was awake. For the first time in months, the fog lifted from my chest. All the confusion, all the double guessing, gone. In its place was a quiet, vibrating certainty. She was cheating, and not emotionally, not vaguely. This was physical, intentional, routine, and she hadn't slipped. She hadn't broken down crying or left clues in the laundry. No, she built this lie like a second home, well decorated, lived in, full of backup chargers. I leaned my head back against the seat, staring up at the car roof, and I smiled. Not because it didn't hurt. It did, deep in a place I didn't have a name for. But because finally, I had something real, not just cold shoulders, not just silence and evasion, evidence, and more importantly, purpose. Now I knew the terrain, and I knew how to win. I sat there for another 20 minutes watching the messages keep coming. Corey sent a selfie from the hotel bar. Mara replied with a heart emoji and said she was wrapping up a Zoom call. She wasn't even trying to be clever, and maybe that's what stung most. She didn't see me as a threat, not anymore. She saw me as a placeholder, furniture, something that wouldn't move unless pushed. But I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. That's the mistake most men make. They rage, they blow it all up, they demand explanations and apologies. But I've always been better with plans. So I put my phone down, took a slow breath, and watched the reflection of the streetlight dance across the windshield like it was drawing blueprints. She had no idea. She thought she'd won. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of my quiet revenge. Friday night, 6:18 p.m. She stood by the mirror, adjusting a silver earring. Nothing flashy, just enough to say I put in effort. She smoothed her blouse and smiled at her reflection with that same practiced ease she used at networking events. The perfume hit next, sharp, floral, unfamiliar. I stood in the hallway, sipping, wine slowly, unnoticed. "You look nice," I said, because it felt like the kind of thing a husband should say. She turned quickly, a bit startled, then gave me a tight-lipped smile. "Thanks, work dinner thing. Don't wait up, work dinner. The same coworkers she barely liked. The same ones who, according to her, were too corporate and full of drama. But now suddenly they warranted a Friday night. I didn't argue, didn't even blink, just raised my glass. "Have fun." She paused for a moment, just a flicker of something behind her eyes. Hesitation, guilt. Maybe it was indigestion. I couldn't tell anymore. Then she grabbed her purse and walked out the door, heels clicking down the steps like punctuation. I waited exactly 10 minutes. Then I opened the app. Her location pinged once at a restaurant downtown, just long enough to anchor the alibi. But by 7:05, the dot shifted east toward the waterfront. The hotel she and Corey favored wasn't the most discreet. But I suppose discretion didn't matter when you assumed the other person was still asleep at the wheel. I didn't follow her, didn't call, didn't cry. I poured another glass of wine and walked through the house with a different set of eyes. It looked the same. Neutral tones, framed quotes about gratitude, throw pillows with hand-stitched words like home and together, all of it curated, all of it fake. Tonight, though, the house felt different, sharper, less like a home and more like a stage. And I was finally the one holding the script. I took a seat at the dining table with my laptop, opened a blank spreadsheet and titled it Details, Names, Dates, Times, Room Numbers. I wrote it all down. Not for confrontation, but for control. Evidence wasn't just proof. It was leverage. It was power. At 9:43 p.m., I refreshed her location again, still at the hotel. I imagined her laughter echoing off wallpaper, Corey's cologne hanging in the air, a bottle of wine chilling on the desk. The betrayal no longer lived in my imagination. It had coordinates. I took a deep breath and leaned back in my chair. Strangely, I didn't feel broken. I felt awake. This wasn't heartbreak. It was strategy. She'd think she still held the upper hand, that I was still the man who muttered, "Have fun," while she walked out the door. But all she'd done was give me clarity, and clarity is dangerous when it's quiet. Saturday morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen like nothing had changed. Mara stood at the counter, back to me, humming again, same tune, different tone, lighter, like a woman who had outrun a storm and never got wet. She was making pancakes, something she only did when she wanted to be seen as loving, as present. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. She glanced over her shoulder and gave me that easy grin. "You want strawberries or blueberries on yours?" "Strawberries," I said, matching her smile like always. She laughed. I know. Just checking. It was a dance, and I played along. I set the table while she plated the food, even added a little whipped cream like she used to when we were first married. We sat, forked bites between syrupy small talk, TV shows, weekend plans, maybe trying that new Thai place next week. She looked content, relaxed in a way that told me she believed she was winning, that the storm had passed, that the old Derek had returned, passive, forgiving, dull. But she didn't notice the difference in my eyes, because I was studying her now. Everything from the angle of her smile to the delay in her responses, watching, memorizing. The week before, I would have given anything for a breakfast like this. But now it felt like a costume party, and I had the sharpest mask in the room. That afternoon I bought roses, 12 long-stemmed ones, deep red, with a card that simply read, "You looked beautiful this morning." She blushed when I gave them to her, eyes wide like she just won a bet she didn't even have to place. "You're really trying," she said sweetly, tracing her fingers along the petals. Smiled. "Of course I am." And the thing was, I was trying to see just how easily she'd fall into the illusion. We spent the day like a couple from a movie montage, grocery shopping, laughing over spilled milk, even shared a bottle of wine while prepping dinner. She curled up against me on the couch that night, scrolling through Instagram, resting her head on my shoulder like we'd never skipped a beat. But behind my calm, my mind kept ticking. She wasn't suspicious. That meant she wasn't smart enough to be. She thought kindness meant closure, that the marriage she sabotaged could be salvaged by pancakes and roses. What she didn't understand, what she never saw, was that I'd stopped hoping for repair the moment I saw Corey's name. This wasn't reconciliation, this was reconnaissance. She thought I was healing, but really I was sharpening. 2 weeks later, we were sitting in a friend's living room, surrounded by snacks, wine glasses, and the easy laughter of couples who still believed in each other. Mara had planned a night. Game night. Her idea. Our circle. Familiar faces. Safer territory. To everyone else, we looked fine. Maybe even happy. I smiled at the right jokes, passed the chips, and played my part like a seasoned actor who'd memorized the script. Mara was glowing in that curated kind of way. Not real joy. Performance joy. She leaned into me on the couch when she laughed, traced her hand along my arm when no one was looking. I felt it all. I just didn't feel any of it. We played some ridiculous card game meant to reveal how well couples knew each other, who's more likely to leave dishes in the sink, who takes longer to get ready. Each answer triggered playful nudges and exaggerated groans. But not from us. No. We were poised, perfect, predictable, until someone asked, "Who's more?" Jealous. That's when I decided to press. I turned to our friends with a smile so gentle it made the silence that followed land harder. "If she ever left me," I said lightly, "I'd probably send flowers to her new guy for putting up with her." Laughter rippled. Across the room, everyone laughed, except Mara. Her smile froze, half finished, half faded. She didn't speak, but her fingers tightened just a fraction on her wine glass. Her eyes didn't dart to mine, but I could feel her thoughts slamming against the inside of her skull. That wasn't a joke to her, because it wasn't meant to be. It was a mirror, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't like her reflection. The game continued. So did the laughter, but her presence had shifted. Every giggle after that was just a little too sharp. Every glance just a little too quick. I could feel the air thinning. Between us, we rode home in silence. No music, no conversation. Her hands were folded in her lap, still, cold. I parked the car in the garage and didn't move for a second. I just stared straight ahead. Waited. Eventually, she broke. "Why did you say that?" she asked, not quite whispering, not quite calm. I turned my head slowly, keeping my voice neutral. "Say what? The thing, the flowers." "That wasn't a joke, Derek." I let out a small chuckle, leaning back in my seat. Everyone laughed, her voice dropped. I didn't. That silence stretched again, thick with things she wanted to say but couldn't. "Why are you acting weird lately?" she finally asked. More accusation than question. I gave her a long look, not sharp, not cruel. Just clear. I'm just finally seeing things clearly. That line didn't explode. It sank quiet and slow, like a stone into deep water. She didn't respond. She just nodded, barely, and stepped out of the car without slamming the door. But her footsteps echoed through the house like a warning. The game had changed, and she was starting to feel it. Something changed after that night. Not dramatically, not all at once, but like a small crack in glass. Slow, spreading, impossible to stop once it starts. Mara stopped humming in the mornings. That was the first thing I noticed. No soft tunes while she prepped coffee. No under-the-breath singing as she packed her work bag. Just silence. Heavy and uncertain. She watched me more closely now. I'd catch her staring while I buttered toast or laced up my shoes, and not the loving kind of stare, the calculating kind. Like she was trying to figure out who I'd become, but she never asked directly. Instead, she tried to reassert control in the way she knew best. Little comments, subtle power plays. "You're spending a lot of time on your phone lately," she said one night as I scrolled on the couch. I didn't look up. "So are you." That stopped her cold. She sat beside me in silence, fingers curled around a throw pillow. Her body faced the TV, but her attention was fixed squarely on me. "Is there someone?" she asked, careful with her tone. I let the question linger, then looked over and smiled. Gentle but unreadable. "Why would you ask that?" she faltered. "You're different." I nodded. "So are you." Her throat moved like she was about to say something, but the words didn't arrive. She just stared as if trying to identify a stranger in a familiar room, and I let her sit with that discomfort. The next day, I told her I had a business trip. "Out of town?" she asked, setting down her coffee mug. I nodded. 3 nights, I'll be working remotely. Probably won't have time to check in much. She blinked fast. "Where?" "Just upstate." I didn't offer more. She didn't press, but the panic in her eyes was undeniable. She tried to hide it, smiling, nodding, making some joke about finally getting the bed to herself, but it didn't land. Her laugh was too tight, her hands too still, because deep down she felt it, that this wasn't about work, that something was shifting out of her control. When I left that Friday, suitcase in hand, she kissed me on the cheek with forced calm. "Text when you get there." I nodded. And I didn't. I checked into a boutique hotel 30 minutes away, sleek, minimal, quiet. I unpacked slowly, hung my shirts in the closet like I'd be staying longer than I was, ordered room service, watched the city lights from my window, and I didn't text, not that night, not the next day. She called twice, I let it ring. The silence wasn't punishment. It was a mirror, one I knew she'd eventually look into. By the second night, she left a voicemail. "Hey, just checking in. Hope everything's going. Okay, call me when you can." Her voice cracked just slightly on the last sentence. I played the message twice, not out of sympathy but to hear the shift, the quiet fear curling beneath her words. The same fear I'd once swallowed in the dark night after night. Now it was hers to hold. When I returned home Sunday evening, the house was spotless. Too spotless. The kind of clean that screams panic. Candles lit in every room, a roast warming in the oven, a playlist humming softly through the living room speakers. Something acoustic and melancholy, like she wanted to stage a memory we'd never actually had. I stepped through the front door like a stranger returning to an Airbnb. Suitcase in hand, keys quiet in my palm. Mara was standing in the hallway, already waiting. Her face broke into a smile that was just a second too delayed. "You're back early." I didn't smile back. "Beat traffic." She reached for my suitcase, a gesture so out of character it made me pause. "Let me." "I've got it," I said calmly, passing her without a glance. She followed me into the kitchen. The scent of rosemary and thyme filled the air, rich and savory, one of my favorites. I watched her stir the pot with rehearsed ease like a contestant in a cooking show under pressure. "How was the trip?" she asked. "Productive." She set the spoon down. "You didn't call. I was busy." She nodded slowly, but the silence afterward wasn't agreement. It was containment. She was swallowing questions, burying them under smiles, unsure which version of me would answer. We ate dinner like two diplomats at a peace summit. Polite, composed, careful. She asked about the Siu hotel. I described the view. She asked if I met any clients in person. I said most of it was digital. She smiled. I smiled. In between us sat a meal she prepared not out of love, but out of desperation. A peace offering from someone who'd only just begun to realize the war had started months ago. And she'd already lost ground. After dinner, I excused myself to take a long shower. The hot water pounded against my back as I leaned into the tile wall, eyes closed, listening to nothing but the echo of running water and my own calm breathing. Didn't feel satisfaction, not yet, but I did feel distance, and that distance, it no longer scared me. When I returned to the bedroom, she was already under the covers, phone in hand, pretending to scroll. I climbed in beside her. Not too close, not far, just there. The light from her screen made her face look older, tired, Her fingers hovered over her screen like she didn't know who to text or what she could even say. Eventually, she turned the phone off. "I missed you," she whispered into the dark. I stayed still. "Did you?" Yes." She waited for me to respond. I didn't, because I wasn't sure if I missed her or just the version of me who once thought this woman was my home. I woke early the next morning. The bed beside me was warm but empty. I followed the scent of coffee to the kitchen where Mara stood in a robe, 2 mugs on the counter. "Morning," she said, voice thin but hopeful. I nodded, took the mug and leaned against the counter. She hesitated like she was working up to something. "You seemed off last night," I sipped slowly. "I'm tired. That's not all," she said quietly. "You're distant. Different." I looked at her. She was bracing herself now. I could see it in the tension around her eyes. "I think," she continued, "we need to talk." I stayed silent. Her voice dropped. "Are you seeing someone?" The question hung there, trembling between us. And for a brief second, I considered telling her everything. Corey, the app, the text threads I'd read a dozen times over, her lies, her hotel visits, the way she left me starving in a bed we once shared, only to feast somewhere else. But I didn't, because she wasn't ready to hear it, and I wasn't ready to give her the chance to deny it. So I smiled instead, just enough to rattle her. "No," I said, "but thank you for asking." She looked away, breath catching. In her throat, I left the kitchen then, not in anger, but with purpose. Let her sit in the silence she once fed me nightly. Let her feel how loud it can get. Tuesday evening, she came home to silence. Not the awkward kind, not the simmering tension we'd been dancing with, but a silence, carved clean and deliberate, like the room itself was holding its breath. The lights were low, the air still. On the kitchen table, under the soft hum of the overhead lamp, sat a single manila envelope. No card, no note, just the weight of it. I was gone. No suitcase by the door, no key clinking in the bowl, not even the faint echo of a car. Pulling into the driveway, Mara stepped forward slowly like someone approaching a coffin. She opened the envelope with hesitant fingers. Inside, the divorce papers, thick, neatly organized, signed on every page that needed me, my name there in black ink, precise, unshaken. Her name stood blank beside each line, like an invitation to join a story she didn't think would ever reach this chapter. She stared at them for a long time. Her eyes scanned the top page over and over, trying to make the words rearrange themselves into something less final. Her lips parted, maybe to speak, maybe to deny. But no one was listening. The hallway behind her stretched long and empty. She set the papers down and called my name. Once, then again, louder. Her voice echoed off the walls. The house didn't respond. She walked through each room like she was looking for the man she used to control. Our bedroom, my office, the patio, no suitcase, no note, just the void I left behind. By the time she made it back to the kitchen, her hands were trembling. She picked up her phone, dialed once, straight to voicemail. She called again, then texted, "Where are you? Can we talk?" No reply. For the first time in all her carefully choreographed months of secrecy and lies, Mara had no script left to follow. No clever cover story. No smug upper hand. Only absence. That night, I checked into a short-term rental on the edge of town, clean, sparse, temporary, but it felt more like home than the one I just left behind. I didn't need to look at my phone. I knew she'd spiral. I knew she'd unravel. She thought this would end with a fight, with me begging, shouting, throwing accusations she could cry over, but I'd given her nothing. Not even my shadow. This ending wasn't loud. It was surgical. Finality doesn't need noise to make itself known, and that's exactly what those papers were. Finality dressed in ink and consequence. The next morning, she texted again. "Please, let's talk." Just once. I didn't reply. Not because I hadn't written the words in my head a dozen times, but because she didn't deserve them. Not anymore. She'd used my silence as cover. Now she was choking on her own. The courthouse lobby was all glass and marble, with echoes that made every footstep sound like a verdict. Mara sat alone on the bench across from the elevators, clutching a slim black folder to her chest. Her hair was perfectly done, her blazer pressed. Her lips painted the soft pink of someone trying to look untouched, but her hands gave her away. They trembled, not wildly, not enough to be noticed by strangers, just enough that she had to keep gripping the folder as if it were the only thing. Tethering her to the moment, I walked in wearing a charcoal suit, tailored, precise. Calm wrapped itself around me like armor. The woman who once studied my posture for weakness barely recognized this version of me. She stood up fast, that flicker of hope in her eyes, like maybe we'd talk in private first. Maybe I'd pull her aside, say this was all for show. But I didn't stop. I just nodded once. Mara. She opened her mouth, but I was already walking past her into the courtroom. She followed. It was quick. My attorney spoke efficiently, laying out the structure, irreconcilable differences, no children, division of assets per the prenup she once insisted I sign because you never know, right? But then came the part I prepared for. Your Honor, my attorney said calmly, my client would like to submit a binder of communications relevant to the grounds for emotional detachment. The clerk walked over and retrieved the binder from my briefcase. It was black, thick, heavy. Inside, screenshots, hotel logs, chat transcripts, time-stamped location histories, everything, Corey's messages. Mara's responses, the room numbers, the weekday meetups labeled client dinners, all categorized, all legally obtained. The judge flipped through a few pages, his expression neutral but focused. Mara didn't speak. Her jaw tightened. Her breath came, shallower, my lawyer continued. We're not seeking punitive damages. This is not about vengeance. My client simply wants the court to see that his emotional withdrawal and decision to dissolve the marriage are not arbitrary. I didn't look at her. Not because I was avoiding her, but because I already knew what she looked like when the house of cards caved. It was the same face she wore the night I first heard. Not tonight. Only now. There were witnesses. When the hearing ended, the judge confirmed. Divorce granted. Finalization. Within 30 days. I stood, shook hands with my attorney, and walked toward the lobby. Mara followed me out again, but slower this time. Like her heels were heavier than her pride. Outside, the sun was harsh, the steps of the courthouse wide and empty. She sat down on the top one, folder still pressed to her ribs like it could undo everything. I paused. She looked up at me. I don't understand, she whispered. You didn't even fight. You didn't yell. You just left. I studied her. Not with rage. Not with love. Just understanding. You don't have to yell to leave someone, I said. Her eyes glistened and her voice cracked just enough to finally let the truth slip out. You turned me down every night. She said it like she couldn't believe it had happened. Like I mirrored her own words back at her, but in a tone she'd never heard before. I didn't reply. What was there left to say? I walked down the steps. Behind me, I could hear her voice fade. Once so confident, so sharp, now barely more than a breath against the wind. At the bottom, I paused and looked ahead. Not at a finish line, but at a beginning. The ache was still there, of course, but it wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. It was peace. It was freedom, bought not with fury, but with stillness. And in the end, it was her silence that taught me how powerful mine could be. Thanks for watching. What do you think about how Derek handled everything? Would you have confronted Mara earlier, or do you agree with his cold, quiet approach? Let me know in the comments. I'm really curious to hear your take. And if you enjoy true relationship stories, feel free to subscribe. More are coming soon.